This is the longest I've been muted for a while.
All right.
Okay, welcome everyone to this August 18th, 2021 meeting of the City of Courtenay Official Community Plan Advisory Committee. I would like to start with acknowledging that we are meeting and Zooming on the unceded territory of the Comox First Nation. Thank you. Second, and the formal part of the statement is due to the COVID-19 pandemic and in accordance with Ministerial Order M192/2020 and in the class order mass gatherings, council meetings can be conducted virtually and live stream on the City of Courtenay's YouTube channel, and we are doing that. So this has been a long, tough stretch of time now with the fourth wave of the pandemic, the need to acknowledge our First Nations residential home histories, residential schools, the fires, the heat, the list seems to go on. And I really do appreciate you all for persevering in this process and continuing on, and thank you for that. And thank you for the staff. You've taken on an immense task and you are making progress. So acknowledgements to, even in these difficult times, you are moving ahead. The other thing I would like to do now is acknowledge the contributions of Derek Constantino, who submitted his resignation to the committee. Betty and I wrote a joint letter to Derek thanking him for his rather considerable contributions and wished him well in the process. So we have lost one of our members, and I just wanted to acknowledge his contribution that he's made to date. Okay, so the first on the agenda is adoption of the minutes of our May 8th, what is it, May 13th meeting. Are there any errors, omissions, revisions? No. Motion to accept. Betty, seconder. Diane, all those in favor? Carried. Thank you. Are there any, you've seen, we do have a pretty formal agenda with not a huge amount of content, but is there any items people would like to add to the agenda or ensure that we are covering in the process? Okay, so we're going to do about 3 things today, I think, as Nancy has 4 things. Talk to you about a presentation by city staff of where we stand with respect to the OCP document itself, a discussion of the timelines moving ahead and what's the advisory committee's role. And then we want to have a short discussion as to how we can pull together our contributions as an advisory committee. And we've sent out a notice on that, but we want to go and have a discussion with you as to whether that works and how best to make it work. And then have an open discussion of critical factors that you think are necessary to get closure in this process, both on the project itself and on the committee. So don't see any strong reactions to that. So Nancy, would you like to do your presentation, please?
Absolutely. So I'll share my screen. And this presentation today is, the intention is just to point out some of the key pieces of the draft OCP that you've now been forwarded parts A through C just this morning. So staff are just getting a look at it in its assembled form. You're getting this advanced viewing of it in its assembled still draft form. And I just want to highlight some elements of it that that you may not be aware of, or things that are a little bit new or updated since you last looked at various content. So just looking at the table of contents here, just getting right into a texty slide. And I do appreciate, you might have to kind of lean in a little to read it there. I just want to use this slide to show, point out a few points that, for instance, we talked a lot about the length of the document and not wanting it to be too long, while at the same time wanting to capture the richness of detail that is needed to steward an ambitious vision. The Part A has been, believe it or not, substantially reduced. It was formerly in that, creeping up into that 60-page limit. There's much more on the topic of reconciliation and specific relationship of city with the Comox First Nation, time immemorial, and policies on reconciliation in general. So we look forward to you looking at that. There's a section, short section within the Part A that outlines the realities of implementing this plan. So it is meant to read like a narrative. It's meant to be quite accessible language to the general public and to really anybody who reads it, to help understand that implementing an ambitious vision, as this plan puts forward, takes long-term commitment, takes the participation of many. And so we hope we struck a tone there, and certainly your comments in a section like that would be very welcome as well as the entire document. The regional context statement you would not have seen before. It was not drafted until relatively recently. And of course, we do submit that to the regional district board for their acceptance. Another piece, just that arrow way down there, is showing that indeed the document in its entirety does remain quite long. So we did shave some off the foundations part, always striving to be as economical with wording as possible. However, in the end, it is a large document. We just have to admit that. And so what the strategy will be in communicating it to the public and to other people who may not have the appetite for such a lengthy document, is to create complementary resources, other types of communication tools, summary documents, executive summary, for instance. You would have seen, I wrote an email about that today, so that we have different communication products for different audiences. But ultimately, the plan does look like it's going to be on the lengthy end. I want to draw attention to the chapter on growth management. It's one that would have been circulated, but a lot of refined language has been now included. So I certainly encourage you to read that. It basically, it connects to the regional growth strategy in a solid way. And B, it lays out the physical framework for all the other policy chapters: land use, infrastructure, etc. So it's a very good place to start and to spend some attention. Even if you feel that it's not your particular area of expertise, I'd highly recommend that. It does identify these primary, secondary, infill, and no growth areas. And like I said, it does link to the regional context statement. The land use, just a reminder, we've all seen this map evolving over time. It has received various little refinements as we go, and through the review process, it will still be subject to possible refinements and edits. So if you're looking at it and you're seeing a parcel that you feel a different land use designation is more appropriate, it is still appropriate to have that conversation and to let us know throughout that 60-day consultation period. There are a few images in the document as well. I'm just giving a little snapshot of some of the pieces, the flavor of the document. So the images on the right are example of some of those images. Something that I don't believe the advisory committee will have seen yet is what we're calling neighborhood profiles. They are these 2-page profiles on a number of area-specific land use guidance. They are the various neighborhood centers, but then there's some additional areas that emerged as that staff identified a need of just some very specific targeted policy guidance. So for instance, the Harmston Civic Precinct is one of those areas. It in of itself is not a neighborhood center. However, it is an area of significant city land holdings. And so a vision for how those lands could be programmed or developed, and the lands around them is what this profile here in the OCP gives direction to. And we are expecting that we would be conducting more detailed work in this Harmston area in the near future into the new year. So there will be a commitment to do some area planning, detailed area planning in that particular area of the downtown. Just another example of one of these neighborhood profiles, and I believe there are 13 of them, different neighborhoods with little spotlights on them. Another one is the floodplain. So not really a neighborhood per se, but an area of focused policy guidance. So as you're reading, that I'm just pointing that out. So if you hadn't seen that before, you can look forward to that now. The policy chapters, the thematic ones, is a topic, is a part of the OCP that you all would probably have rolled up your sleeves the most on to this point. And you can see them listed there on the left. And we are aware that, for instance, number 7, the numbering doesn't show up as number 7, but that doesn't mean something's missing. It's just the numbering's out of order. So there are a few edits that need to be made in this document. But nevertheless, there's the list of all the thematic chapters. And the image on the right, I just want to draw your attention that we have made an effort to categorize the policies into various implementation categories. So some of the work, some of the policies direct development standards. So new development, a private development application, for instance. Some of them direct city standards. So, a road standard or a park standard or something like that. Policies inform city work plan actions. So that means ultimately a council and senior staff, they will have to be considering over time, over the many years of this plan, the 10 years, which policies to work on, which actions to work on given staff availability, resources, because we know we can't do everything at once. A number of policies are considered routine city activities. So these are policies that direct new perspectives or processes into existing and routine city activities. There's a category called opportunity action that identifies the city's position should an opportunity present itself to advance a policy. Often we're looking for maybe some enabling legislation from the province or a particular partner or funding to come through. Partnership action is policy identifying the need and willingness of the city to work in partnership on a number of topics that really the city cannot do it alone. And then advocacy is identifying that there's certain topics that we just need to advocate to other bodies, often senior levels of government. On the policy chapters, these slides, I'm just giving a little snapshot of what they look like. You will have seen a template earlier on, but this now is the form that they've taken. So let's say for Parks and Recreation, we see the objectives on the main page, the first page. There is a description of the context of Courtenay today. There's a description of how the chapter and that topic advances the goals identified earlier on the plan. And then the following pages, they list the objectives again and the policies to achieve the identified objective. And you can see the use of those implementation codes, those categories in there so that hopefully a reader is getting a sense. Oh, this is something the city can just incorporate to what they're normally doing, or, oh, this is something that takes significant work plan efforts. And so just to help people understand the realities of that implementation. Speaking of implementation, the chapter part D on it was not yet shared with you because it is still being worked on. So as soon as it is available, we will definitely share it with you. But in it, we have the sections that we're considering called corporate alignment, community engagement and partnerships, the OCP performance measuring, monitoring, and then development implementation support tools. In the development permit areas, that's another implementation tool, but really it's something quite specific, design guidelines for the most part. That chapter also will be shared with you as soon as it's available. Now, that's just to give you, a broad sense of that document that I shared earlier today. The next part of what I want to talk about is the public engagement piece, and then a timeline. So my presentation today is quite short. We will be holding outdoor open houses in all the urban and neighborhood centers. So I believe it's 7 that we have now narrowed in on. They will be community or at schools. So for the school district has indicated that we can hold them on their property outdoors, possibly indoors in October, but we're still waiting to learn more about their policies and procedures on that. It looks like at North Island College, we should be able to hold one. And then in other areas, it may just be in a city park. And we will advertise, the dates and times of all those well in advance. We will have a recorded presentation of the OCP online. I mean, that'll be staff providing that presentation. And it will be recorded and available so that anybody can go and read it at their leisure. They don't have to attend a scheduled event to watch that presentation. But in addition, we will have some webinars, or we might call them virtual town halls, where the presentation will be given and then people can ask questions right in that format. We had hoped for an in-person set of options. It's just not seeming prudent at the moment. Although within a 60-day period, I suppose there's always the potential to reevaluate that. There will be an online survey. I have a couple slides on that. It will run the full duration of the 60 days. And then another engagement option is presentations to other bodies at their request. So the city staff can make themselves available for that. We will make ourselves available for that, but we would first encourage that the group do as much self-directed study of the OCP as possible. For instance, simply watching the recorded presentation online. And then if there's further questions after that, then staff could make themselves available. And then, of course, comments outside these channels are welcome. People always can write or call or things like that. Now the dates, I got that asterisk there, dates to be determined. But these webinars and outdoor events, etc., we are expecting to be a few weeks after the engagement officially starts. So I realize I probably didn't say that in this particular presentation, that September 7th, the day after Labor Day, is the day that we are intending to have the plan be publicly available, to have the survey live, get the word out through the various communication channels that the city has, and then start to ramp up some events, a couple weeks after that, and become visible and very accessible in the community. And then just a reminder that during the 60 days, we're also referring to our statutory referral bodies. The questions to the public. This is a real challenge, figuring out how to frame a survey on such a comprehensive document, such a lengthy and detailed document. So what the OCP team has come up with is that the survey will ask, how well do you think the following policy changes will help us to meet our community goals? And then it'll go through no more than 10. And so there will be the really core critical elements of the OCP, a lot of them physical, growth oriented. And then and so I'm using this example here of a MetroQuest slide because we're going to be using the MetroQuest platform again. But let's say, in this little piece here where if you could see my cursor moving, the question would be, How well do you think focusing all our future growth in existing areas helps to meet our goals? And then people can rate it with the stars. So those very simple, rating input. But then there'll be a chance, there'll be a button that says, why is this important? So if someone, maybe they're not well versed in this topic, they want to learn a little more. Why is this policy being proposed? So they can learn a little more. And then there would be another link that allows them to ask, to explore that topic even further with more of the documentation from the OCP if they want to keep drilling down. So we want to help people access, the basic questions, but also do more self-study exploration of the topics at their, depending on their interest level. So we intend to set the survey up that way. But the questions are circling around focusing all future growth within existing areas. What do people think of that? Prioritizing most growth in a series of neighborhood and town centers, allowing more options for housing types in all neighborhoods, building all new homes and buildings to net zero GHG standard by 2030, protecting existing rental housing, investing in natural and engineered forms of green infrastructure, significantly shifting spending to prioritize walking and cycling, taking full cost accounting approach to decision making, and taking an equitable and co-creative approach to public participation. Now, these words we've been advised by council to be and as yourselves to be as plain language as possible, to make these concepts as accessible as possible. So those are our directions. We're continuing to work on that. And if you have ideas today in the general discussion, we're happy to hear them as well. Okay, this is my last slide. So in terms of the next steps, before September 7th, so again, it's anticipated that the plan will be available September 7th, but we'll if it's a little late, that could happen too, but the goal is September 7th. But before that date, you now have more than half of the OCP, and you have this advanced time to review amongst yourselves. Then in that September 7th, October into early November, those 60 days, there will be the consultation and the referral period with KFN Chief and Council as well. In November, once the consultation is concluded, then staff will write up that consultation summary. We will discuss it with yourselves, the advisory committee. We'll hold another advisory committee meeting. And in that meeting, we understand that a major objective will be the refining of that report from the advisory committee. And so I know Norm was going to take some time today to discuss with you some ideas on that final report and how it can come to be. And then in this kind of December, January timeline, the first and second reading of the OCP bylaw, including your report, would be included as an attachment to the bylaw that would be presented to council. Just a matter of housekeeping here, we have to submit the regional context statement to the regional district board at that time. And then after that, if it passes first and second reading, then we proceed to a public hearing. We hear what the public again has to say at that public hearing. And if there are, assuming minor changes or no changes, we can proceed to fourth reading, which is adoption of that bylaw. So that's it for myself. I, again, just wanted to offer some real broad strokes on what to see in the plan and the general timeline. And if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer. And if there's anything from other staff who want to answer, please feel free to jump in as well.
Okay. Not seeing a burst of hands. Are there, what are your initial reactions? I know that there's a problem with length, and it's one of the reasons I'd asked Nancy to send out what are the provincial requirements and what goes into an OCP. And if you read those over, you saw that not only were you to do how the communities develop, but it also had to do with environmental, housing, social. And once you start putting all of those items into a document, and then want to go from the overall vision down to the specifics of land use and planning requirements, it gets big. And That is a challenge that Nancy has recorded, and it will be a continuing challenge. But what are your first reactions? Okay, we've got some silence there. So let's. So I know that it was asking a lot to. Oh, Betty. Okay, thank you.
Well, perhaps because you and I have been more involved than some of the others, maybe your comments and my comments right now might help stimulate feedback, because I know there's been some dialogue in the chats. I've spoken informally to a number of residents in Courtenay who know I'm on this committee, and they've asked me about it, and I've just said that there's going to be reports made available to the public in the fall, but that one of the major things is that we're not going to expand our boundaries. We're going to densify, that we're going to have urban nodes and connected parkways, all of which have met with enthusiasm. But individually and separately, what I'm getting from people is, I can't believe that the city thinks it's only going to be 4,500 people growth in the next 10 years. So I don't know if the city staff have ever done a retrospective, like going back 10 years and taking a look at our population growth. I don't know whether it would be valid to have a projection, but the one critical comment that I've heard from diverse groups is that they think this number is way too low. And I think there's enthusiasm for the report. I don't think people are going to read every page. I think they're going to read, as they do all reports, bits and pieces and the executive summary. But I think there's interest in this.
Adding to what Betty's saying, I worked on the city of Calgary's 30-year transportation plan, where we looked at what we thought the growth would be and the urban development mapping, and what the transportation needs would be and what the cost of it would be. And we mapped that out over 30 years, and it was several $1 billion worth of investment. And it was predicated on us growing to a certain population in 30 years, the city of Calgary. We reached that in about 18, that population level. So further to Betty's comments, I think some, if you will, contingency analysis or risk analysis, what would happen if we grow faster than what we're projecting, would be a useful element to at least talk about in these meetings.
Norm, I'm happy to jump in.
Yep.
Can you hear me? Yeah. It just, yeah, staff, OCP team have definitely acknowledged that too, that, you know, population projections are as good as they can be, but they're based on certain assumptions and are indeed only projections. So the implementation part of the OCP does include a number of monitoring indicators to monitor, I should say. And the uptake of development, the pace of growth, those are a really critical indicator that would then trigger information back to council that the OCP should be reviewed perhaps quicker than the 10-year time if that population is more rapidly growing. So there's definitely room to amend and review it much sooner than 10 years if the community demands it.
And I think that commitment might well be a part of the process that you're taking forward, that this is your best snapshot. It will be revised if necessary. And thinking further on Betty's comments, we focused a lot on policies and issues and whatnot. And the growth projection work was done by your consultants very early on in the process. I don't think we discussed those. So in my mind anyways, I don't have a good understanding of those growth projections. And maybe it's now that the growth management section is available, it would be worthwhile to look at that so we have a better context to deal with what Betty's right, a very common type of questions. The sense is that this community is growing hugely. The track records don't necessarily support that over the last 30 years, but but we are growing and everyone can see the growth happening, and 4,000 doesn't seem to be a very big number. Any other reactions? Lindsay.
Thanks, Norm. Nancy, I wonder if you could just speak a bit more about the opportunity
Sheila, you'll be in the queue. Thank you.
For different groups to provide input during the 60-day period. So I heard you say that you want groups to have done some pre-work and to come up with some questions, but I'm just wondering if there's a way, or I'd be interested to hear more from you about how we could make the information more accessible to folks and more bite-sized, so that we could, for example, you know, if I think to the poverty reduction planning process that the CVRD just underwent, they did like a self-guided toolkit and took that to the various groups like the Coalition to End Homelessness, like the Social Planning Society and the Early Years Collaborative, and just really provided them with a sort of a more simple way of providing some feedback on specific issues. So I'd be curious to know how we might support some of our groups locally to do that, because I think, you know, through that process, we definitely got some great feedback from a wide variety of people by only taking it to one place and kind of putting some of the work on them in making it self-guided.
Yeah, Lindsay, it's a great question. We did have a self-guided workbook earlier in the engagement process last summer when the input was more, I think, generative is how we might call it. You know, we didn't have you know, ideas fully formed yet, so that was a really good way to just flush out, you know, a wide variety of ideas. Now we have proposals, and so it's kind of a different nature of engagement where we're asking for feedback on something being presented as opposed to, you know, more that visioning kind of engagement. It's in terms of communication tools, that kind of executive summary, shorter kind of document I took a first stab at sharing with you today is certainly that, you know, we want to create something that's more digestible that way. And I think at this point, you know, the guided reflection or discovery of the plan is really just helping people understand what topics are discussed where and what those general directions are. That it appears that the vision, the goals, the direction, and the objectives help really give that container of thinking that then if someone is still very interested, they can go and then read the specific policies. So I think building on the vision and the directions, goals and objectives is probably our best available information to be accessible. If there's ways to shape it differently in that executive summary, you know, kind of mock-up document, just very draft, you know, if there's ideas there, happy to hear them. We could release them, you know, right on September 7th, or we could even be, you know, releasing throughout that 60 days if we need just a little bit more time to develop them. I think we lost our chair. Is that possible?
Uh-oh.
Betty, how do you feel about
Well, I will, I'll endeavor to step in until Norm comes back. Listen, we have 8 of our members here. We need to find out, and I think Norm and I will follow up on this, with a contact with the other members who are not there. 8 is a quorum, and when Norm comes back, he'll talk about these small groups that we have argued for and will have. But what I hear is 2 people from our committee giving feedback to the staff. I'm really asking some of the other people, you may feel overwhelmed, you just got this document, but what's your sense now of where we are in this process of development? And of course, we will have the individual groups and the opportunity to read in depth and comment on specific aspects. But I think the staff are really asking us right now, and I don't think silence is helping. So please, please speak up. And Tom, thank you. If there's other people, I don't see everybody above me. So I saw Tom's hand and I'm recognizing him. And if anybody else has a hand up, let me know and they can go next. Okay, Tom, please go.
Nancy, did you want to say something?
Only that Sheila also has her hand up, so.
Thank you, Sheila. You can be next after.
I was ahead of Sheila.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, Betty. I go overall, I guess I would say that I think we're making really good progress on this huge endeavor. I've been critical of its size for feels like years now. Maybe it hasn't been that long, but you know, when I heard a retired counselor tell me he'd never read the OCP, it really woke me up. You know, we're gonna, when I saw your schedule, Nancy, we all realize that ultimately, after all this hard work, it's our mayor and council who get to vote on yay or nay in this, and they'll get a chance to read our citizens committee report. But you know, it's really challenging times now. I don't think people are reading much. They're certainly not. You know, I'm not sure what they're doing with their leisure. But your comment, Nancy, about reading the OCP in our leisure, reading the committee's report in leisure. I would venture a huge wager that the mayor and council, not a single one of them will read this document before voting on it. And if we're happy with that, well, I guess that's a commentary on just what the OCP is and how important it is in our society. So I do have a question that perhaps started a bunch of this other little humorous dialogue. Is there any plans from staff's perspective to read this to them, cover to cover? Now, that'd be a daunting challenge, so I took it upon myself in that last comment to maybe make it humorous, but what if we actually implemented a new book reading or something where the author reads a chapter, or you know, from 6:30 to 9 o'clock, Tom's going to read a section of the OCP draft on the whatever at some public venue. We could all take turns putting that together and putting it out there. If it's that important, people should know what's in it. And just because I think it's got a lot of good stuff in it, I mean, that would be great. Everyone puts their faith in us, fine. In faith in the consultants, fine. But all that faith and no backup is a little bit frustrating for me. You know, I know this OCP document has got, again, every point. If you go through everything that you've sent today, I think I pretty much support. I found only one that I don't support, and I'll tell you about that later. But I support it all. Some of it could have gone, it certainly could have gone further. But I think as a visionary document for Courtney, it's fantastic. I wish it was in a format where more of it could get read. We've talked about costing it before. I'm wondering what you say to a person doing the survey who fills in one of the open comment boxes and says, how much is this OCP going to put my taxes up? And you know, we've kicked the idea of costing it around before, and we've kind of pushed that off to the sidelines because it's not about costing, it's about visionary ideas. And that's, you know, that's fine, but whether they're visionary ideas or just regular everyday ideas, the city has to have some understanding of what this is going to do to both the overall taxation strategy that the council is going to have to implement every year when they do their budgets. And it's going to have to factor into what the development community has to pay to add a basement suite or 200 unit rental apartment building. And these are real issues that are directly connected to this big visionary document. So I feel like there's, I certainly, as we're drafting our report, will want to add something in there, because part of me is terrified of the policy that could come out of this, because we tend to live in a world where our leaders are averse to increasing taxes at a time when they desperately or drastically need to be doubling our taxes. And as I've been invited here from the development side of things, I can tell you that an increasingly large number of my projects are not moving forward because the development costs in every community are putting undue burden on the individual investor. And so if we just take these ideas, and they're all great, I support every single one of them, but if we turn around and don't get the policy right, because we don't know the actual costs of it, I think this will be another wonderful exercise with glorious vision that could do as much harm with long term as it's intended to do the good stuff. So there was my little soapbox. I'll stop at the moment.
Thank you, Tom.
I will read a chapter if someone puts me up to it. So.
Well, I hope you read a chapter, and I hope you shape it so that it's a transition from vision to implementation. That would be a great twist on it. And I'd love to see how the public receives it, or at least your community receives it. Norm, Sheena had her hand up next, and
Yes.
she should be recognized next.
Thank you, Sheena. And if I could put my hand up to follow her, that would, in the queue, that'd be appreciated. Sheena. Thank you, Betty.
I think it was Sheila,
Oh, I'm sorry, Sheila.
but maybe.
Okay, that's what I thought. I wasn't sure if you were middle of knitting or not.
No. Is the raised hand symbol not noticed by? Does it not?
No, I can't. I couldn't see everybody at the top of my screen, so it was reported to me orally, and I heard Sheena and Sheila.
Okay, but I had just seen Tom and I both had it up for a while. Anyway, so just technical. So yeah, I was really quite excited taking a look at the draft mock-up executive summary and some of that. It just feels like really explicit language on core concepts that people need to get. So I'm okay if not everybody reads all of it. If those pieces get read, people need to understand these are pieces that make some concepts that average public have a lot of trouble struggling with, around the fact that we're in a huge collapse, right? So the fires make it quite clear, and some language to back that up is really quite exciting to see. And that it's bold and it's pretty courageous to make these progressive statements, and it reflects a change in political leadership and general leadership happening. I was thinking, like Tom, that we could just have kind of a bedside, five-side reading of this thing, and a little marathon of people dropping in for it. It could be a fundraiser for something, who knows? But by donation. But we could also, could think about turning it into a bit of a video, audio reading of the OCP that could be on linked on the City of Courtenay page. So in future, people coming along wondering what the OCP says, they could go and watch Tom or myself or any one of us read a little bit of it. And I always find I like listening to things, actually. We could have our own ideas in terms of the Courtenay OCP, and as CBC does it, it's always on repeat. Anyway, as far as official community plans go, I have a fair bit of experience because we live on Hornby, and our OCP and the zoning bylaw that comes out of it is pretty important. in 30 years, I've been through at least 2, possibly more reviews as an advisory committee member there, as a secretary of the land trust committee. So what I know about it is that there's a bunch of multiple uses of the OCP. And of course, I think everybody should read it and have it under their mattress and refer to it frequently when they're thinking about putting a shed up or whatever. But it's true, not very many people do. But one important use is for staff, because the OCP, and I do think staff will read it, and the OCP is an enabling document for land use bylaws, other, issues, permitting, all kinds of development standards piece. That stuff's really important. And so the OCP has to set the stage for that. And so pieces of what's in this OCP are really crucial around consultation, around equity, around all sorts of pieces. And what's in it is really important, even if nobody but the staff referring, using it to present bylaws and fee structures and all the rest of it are the ones who read it. It's still an important document. But I do think more people read it. I think there are policy wonks. I think that there are a substantial number of people who are going to read it, who are, going to refer to it, wondering why something is a certain way. When people say, well, how come this happens? It's, oh, let's look in the official community plan. It'll be there. And so I think there's a lot of value, even though it's long. Seems long for an average person to read. I think that it's in there, and people will take sections, things around these neighborhood sub-plans, and they get filled out in another plan. They get linked. So I think it's okay. And the process that comes from it, the process that created it, and the process that it enables and will and mandates is important. So making it as readable as possible, creating different versions of it so that it can be as accessible as possible, and widely distributing the summary in different formats, like YouTube formats, whatever it takes to get through. It's the piece about, I'm finding it interesting as we are facing so many crises right now. Things have gotten so that I think, my God, we can't ignore this anymore. And yet people think that we can have reconciliation and not change anything, or we can, address climate change and not really change anything. And I think there's messages in there that say stuff's going to change, but you'll like it. It'll change in a way that's more livable. It's going to change in a way that is going to work for you and for everybody around. When it comes to that question of costing, I was quite pleased to see a little heading in there about using full cost accounting, because, and maybe that needs a little bit more emphasis, that it's about preventive spending, that there may be increases in taxes, but they'll actually reduce the costs that you're going to carry in human health, in firefighting, in flood suppression, in insurance costs. I mean, people are having a hard time getting insured at all these days, because it's obvious that the impacts of climate change, of sprawl, of all the rest of it are costing us a lot now. And so this plan is about not keeping taxes low and deferring and pushing the risk off to others, but recognizing it for what it is and doing something so that we will, in fact, save money and save lives and save quality of life. So maybe save the planet. Don't know. So I think there's an argument that's built right into it. There's information that's built right into it about that answer of, is this going to raise my taxes? Might raise your property tax, but it'll lower some other costs for you, intrinsic and extrinsic costs. So it's an educational document. I think I think it's quite exciting. Lots of work, but I think the messaging overall is pretty good.
Thank you. Erin.
Thanks, Norm. Like everybody else, I was able to open up the link about an hour before the meeting today, and it is a little overwhelming when you do read it from top to bottom. I couldn't even read, all of it with any speed. You'd need an hour or two. That being said, the detail that's in there, it needs to be in there for implementation and action. Again, I scroll down to the nature section. That's just naturally what I do to go see how that plays out. That's my section. That's why I'm invested in this process as well. And I think that's okay when people are looking at a document and trying to cherry pick where they fit into an OCP document like that and how it is for a vision for their community. So I am an eternal kind of optimist especially with the youth that are becoming more organized in the Valley, that I think that with the cardinal directions, I think we're hitting on reconciliation. I think there's definite need for some definitive steps for us to locally address climate action. I think that, is front and center, and then it gets super meaty in the center and then hits another demographic, and then, tails out to some more overall kind of recommendation. So again, being an internal optimist, I think there's opportunity to engage with the schools. I put it in the chat box there that if you are having those outdoor open houses, why not? I know it's capacity for staff, but to do a bit of a lunch and learn with the environmental committees, you could probably get a lot of uptake just from those youth spreading the message within the school system, within their clubs. A lot of, maybe a little bit of extra work to get a little bit more traction in the community as it opens up in the beginning of September. But we've spent an immense amount of time on developing these policy sections, and I know there's still more to come. It's important. It defines and tries to create the space that we want to retain for why people are attracted to Courtenay, and so I think it's valuable there. But then again, I know people will then scroll down to the section that applies to why they love Courtenay. So it's pretty high level, but I still think we'll get some uptake for sure, because I think it's having people come together to think about where they want Courtenay to go in the next 30 years is something that really is necessary right now for us to feel a little bit more grounded in the chaos that's happening right now.
Good, thank you. Sheena.
Thanks, Erin. That was great. I agree. There's a couple of things. I think that, there's a lot of different strategies that can be used for knowledge translation. And this is a difficult document to translate. But I think that there's ways that we can do it. A number of us are familiar with ways of translating information. I think bringing in an illustrator of some kind would be super helpful for this process. Even people see pictures and really understand things so much easier that way. So just for, one of those kinds of feedback channels. And I appreciate, Nancy, so much what you said about the online feedback piece. And if as people are more interested, they can click to learn more. I think that, for me, the OCP is an educational document, and it's a way to engage citizens in the communities that they live in. And I know many of us who work in community all the time have underutilized this strategy. And so I'm really happy with the bits that I have been able to read of that big document that you just sent us. The language is way better. It's still a little uneven at times. There's a bit of paternalism in there still. Just, not quite enough oomph to some of it. But really, I was just grateful to see it and to start reading it as and see my vision of an OCP reflected back a little bit, for sure, in the language and focus. I agree 1,000% with Sheila that this total cost accounting, you need to amplify that, because that is what has never been talked about the cost of not doing these things is actually what's overwhelming us right now. So I think we need to be aware of our place in that history, and how do we make that, there's a cost to being aspirational, and that's okay. There's a cost to not being aspirational too, and that's less okay. So yeah, I really want to encourage us to just be brave moving forward and see what the big picture really shows us. When it comes down to, who reads the document, the mayor and council read it, that's okay. I don't care if they don't really. It's an accountability document regardless of whether or not they've read it. That's on them. If I come to them saying, hey, well, you just did something that's contrary to your OCP, that's up to them. That's their responsibility. So I'm sure staff would keep them on track and not allow them to make such a grievous error, but you never know. And I agree that, every section has their audience, has their specific audience. I too went to the areas that I am most interested in participating in, hearing about the things that touch my life the most. So I think we need to be aware of that and figure out ways to reach those specific audiences. And I think because many of us do represent those audiences that, Nancy, I'm more than happy to talk about different ways to reach different audiences of people that I work with or come into contact with. And I really liked there was a chart in the new one that aligned the regional growth strategy with the OCP. I thought that was really helpful for me. It really gave me the little picture and the bigger picture and the bigger, like the Russian doll piece. And I think it would, and I'm not sure if there's plans for that to happen with other master documents, but would really encourage that some sort of, even a color-coded chart of some kind that shows you how these all play together, and hopefully play together well. So yeah, from what I've seen, I really appreciate all the effort that's gone in. I do feel it is more reflective of my experience of Courtney. And I think that we still have a little bit of ways to go around some of the pieces. But overall, yeah, I was pleased. Thanks.
Wow, delightfully deep comments for having a chance to look at it, everyone, in just a bit. We're now 2/3 of the way through our meeting. I want to spend a few minutes at the end talking about our role and our report. But Tanis, Diane, Lindsay, I'm not sure if you've spoken because I was off for a few minutes, but would any of you like to make some comments? Let's start with Tanis. And then Lindsay, did you have your hand up? Okay, Tanis, please.
I can just check in to say that I haven't looked at the brand new pieces. I spent quite a while looking at the structure when that piece came out. And then I also went for a deep dive into the nature section. I would be interested to hear from probably Nancy. When we started this piece, it was all about the biggest exciting deal from my perspective, or one of them, was about the greenhouse gas aspect. And that was, I hope it's more synthesized than in the earlier draft, and I provided feedback to it. But can you give us like an overview level of where we're at with that, Nancy? Like the projections and targets, and, is it still an overarching piece, or is it just kind of like part of it, like nestled in everything at the moment?
That's right. It is in fact embedded in all of the chapters that have carbon footprints or need, our adaptation strategies. There is still the portion at the front of the document in Part A that does do the accounting portion of our greenhouse gas footprint and where the sources of those are coming from. And then the consultant analysis, quantified analysis of what the most strategic actions are to bring that footprint down. So it is the transportation, gasoline, diesel, automobiles, and then actually retrofitting homes is those two big pieces. Nevertheless, there's so much other, aspects, waste streams, et cetera, even carbon sequestration of our urban forests. There's lots of smaller things that contribute to the climate solution. and often a lot of co-benefits to community well-being, et cetera. But in terms of the GHG specifically, that quantification piece, that analysis, the graphs, the figures, the estimated costs of the actions and the expected savings by 2050 to Courtney as a whole are, that means both the public expenditure, the public savings, and also the individual's costs, where someone's, retrofitting their home, that's largely their cost, although maybe the city has rebates or et cetera to leverage that. So this integrated full cost of the climate measures is still included in the part A of the document.
Okay, I know it's really tricky. And just to another little tiny piece after watching your presentation, Nancy, I really like the symbols, like the follow-up bits, how you have to either just integrate it into business as usual or add it to something or wait for someone to present an opportunity, like that implementation piece. I think that's great.
Thank you. Diane, your opportunity.
Hang on one second. There's an airplane trying to take off. All right, that's a little better. I do love where my office is, but I'll tell you sometimes. I love the little planes. I mean, I'm pretty lucky. I have a great office view. A ton of work has gone into it, and I'm proud to be part of the committee that's put this together. I still think about things, and maybe this will be part of what we talk about in our groups, but I still am concerned about what are we doing around the homelessness situation in our community. It's heartbreaking and immobilizing in the sense that when it does happen around the office or when I see it in town, I don't know how to help. And I feel that if we don't start to treat the root of this somehow, and maybe this is a different platform, maybe this is a federal government election question, I don't know, but I'm really concerned about our community because we can have all these wonderful ideas. This is an absolutely beautiful community and has been for, I've been here my whole life. And I'm just so concerned that if we do not treat the root of whatever's happening in our community around this, that we can have all these great ideas, but they aren't going to come to fruition if we don't face what's happening right now. And maybe I'm speaking out of turn, and if I am, I'm sorry, but that's just what's on my heart these days as I go and do business in the Comox Valley. And then the other thing for me too is that I'm really hoping that as Comox unravels unravels, I can't think of a better word, their official community plan in the next while, that we're going to have some synergy and some flow in our community. Because we are the Comox Valley, we all rely on each other, whether we live in Merville or Royston or Cumberland or Comox, we're all part of each other's networks. And we flow back and forth within each other's communities, and I just really hope that somehow we keep that sense of collaboration and who we are as the greater picture. Because when we are the Comox Valley, and there are sometimes where we can't access certain funds because we're all small pockets as opposed to a greater pocket, which is the 67,000 plus people that live, work, and play here. So those are just things that are moving around in my brain, and also preparing for a federal election. And yes, Sheila, there are a lot of policy wonks that will read this, and Tom can attest to that because he's a former board member. There's quite a few policy wonks, and I'm sure there's some people that would be happy to look at it and not reimagine it, but rework it, in their own language to share with others. And I think from a chamber perspective, I think that's where we could be sharing it with key people that we know have worked with us on advocacy issues who love this stuff. You know, we have a former board member that has a name tag that says policy wonk on it. So, and that's my 2 cents worth, and hopefully I didn't take up too much time. Thanks.
Good. No, wonderful. Thanks, folks. I'm going to just, I may send my comments out to a general email because I want to take a little bit of time to talk about how we as a group might get closure. Betty and I started to talk about this a few weeks ago when we had hopes and plans of different documents coming out in different timing. And we proposed that there be a choice, try to give you folks as much choice as possible, but try to give us as much time as possible to try and write it. We didn't know how contentious a collective report from us would be. What I'm hearing is and I may not be using the right adjectives, that we're quite proud of the quality of the document. We believe that it will be incredibly daunting to implement, not only from a cost point of view, and we don't have a full understanding of what the cost is on the developers and the homeowners, but it will be daunting for councils. It will be daunting for to reach our environmental goals or our social goals or our housing goals, and our overall city affordability tax, really, how we're going to achieve this within it. So it affects many of the people in the community. And I think one of the things I would like to see in our report is an emphasis of A, the positives of it, and B, how daunting it is to this that's being put out. This is a visionary document. So that's just a couple of very quick reactions. But I wanted to check with you folks on whether you think these meetings on the 27th, 29th, 30th, and 31st are premature now that we have some understanding of the overall timeline, or would it be better if we took some more time and did it in the second week in October, for example? Betty and I were hesitant about putting the meetings off when we didn't have a sense of how many go rounds we would need to try and get an understanding. I'm hearing that there's some reasonable broad picture understanding if we properly address the array of challenges that this document will provide. So are you feel comfortable talking 27th, 29th, 31st, or 30th on the issues and giving Betty and I some direction, or would you prefer and feel comfortable with putting off the meetings for a little while? Sheena?
Yeah, kind of a point of information. I'm just wondering if you can tell me what the purpose of the report from this committee is, what it is intended to cover. I'm really unclear on that, and how and henceforth those categories I didn't understand.
Okay, the advisory committee was set up with a series of objectives. One, to provide feedback and expertise. Secondly, to identify contacts out to the community. Third, to carry out, taking the word out to the community. And fourth, to write a report that would go along with the final bylaw document on what we feel is the adequacy of both the process and the content. So we've been very heavily involved in those first three things. I think if I haven't forgotten anything. But as a committee of council, every committee of council has a responsibility to report back to council before they're disbanded on whether or not they've achieved the mandate they were given. And so that's what this final report is to do, is to tell council and the public whether or not we believe this OCP and the AC within that have met their objectives and commitments. Is that a fair statement? Ian, Nancy, Tom?
Norm, thank you. I don't know if you guys remember at the very first meeting we had down in the basement of the of the Native Sons Hall, we got to the end and I asked Nancy, well, what happens if we get to the end and we can't, this committee thinks the OCP sucks, that it stinks and that we can't support it. What do we do then? And I don't think anyone imagined that scenario, but it was certainly a possibility. I'm happy to say, without even letting anyone worry for a minute, that I'm in that camp at any point. I think this is an amazing document. I think it's got an amazing quantity and quality of really good visionary ideas in it. And Norm, I can't disagree with you that this report should praise that, but recognize how daunting, as to use your word, this is going to be, how much of a challenge this is going to be for the council of the day next year and for years to come to do it service in implementing it in any way they can. So again, I'm going to be all for it. I've got lots of comments I'd like to see in your report. So I'm happy to go as soon as, let's get it started so that you guys aren't burdened and keep delayed. Let's get that report drafted. At least that's my position at this point. So.
Okay. Aaron, yes?
Yeah, I think, thanks, Norm. I think, like Tom mentions, I think some people or members of the advisory committee probably do have some core comments to make through this process to this point. But I think if there's an opportunity to maybe keep one meeting date for later on in the process, so once we have more time to digest or hear what's happening in the public or some of that response, if there's a need to incorporate additional feedback, maybe just one extra kind of touch-in meeting if people would like to review it or update it since from the point that we had put in our core values in it.
Okay. Betty, and then I can respond to that too. You're muted.
In an earlier email, Aaron also made a suggestion that I think is worthy of consideration, and that is, could we have one of these meetings be online? Because some people are geographically distanced or whatever, and we had never considered that. We wanted them to be face-to-face as much as possible, but perhaps we should consider having one meeting online.
I think that's a good suggestion. And one of the reasons for starting relatively early is to get the initial broad strokes down so we can start framing the report. Certainly, we're going to recirculate it around to everyone to give a second draft at, but I would also encourage processes whereby if you come up with your points, you send us an email and say, work this one in. And also when you see the draft report or that you respond to that both in writing with what your reactions are so we can think of how it would need to change, and a meeting where we do a second revision, come back together and say, are we getting closer? And the other thing I think is we need to keep some flexibility in what the report will say, depending on what we hear over the consultation period. We may be in a little bubble here where we've been kept up to date and more involved, and when it's taken out to the public, we learn some things that we should be reflecting as an advisory committee. So while we're working on the report, we also need to keep it open for late learnings. Is that fair?
Yeah, Norm, I'd be happy to speak to maybe a couple points. You brought up a few, I think even a question in there. Absolutely, it's definitely fair and advised that you keep your minds open for new learning through the consultation process. So absolutely, please do. I'm going to allow Ian to comment on if the objectives, if everybody described them correctly enough of the committee, just to make sure if there was anything missing there. But I do want to point out too, you're mentioning some meetings, and just for public interest, these are what you're talking about are some smaller non-quorum size meetings amongst the advisory committee to study sessions, homework sessions, to crack open that OCP and look at them together. So just to clarify, they're not formal meetings of the advisory committee in which agendas are put forward or business moved forward. So that's just so that everybody knows what we're talking about. We're talking about these additional meetings. There, of course, will be another advisory formal meeting at the end of the consultation process. So everybody, the public, everyone can look forward to that being advertised on our website. At least one. If we need more than one, we can cross that bridge when we get there. And then there's also a matter of just everything that the advisory committee discusses in the spirit of moving the business forward, moving your recommendations forward, should be just documented, captured, filed away, just as part of the OCP process. Just if ever, you know, the public was keen to see that kind of behind the scenes thinking. So Ian, is there anything you want to add to what I said, including clarifying the objectives?
No, I agree with Norm's synopsis that he put forward. When we first contemplated the committee, the idea was that this group would represent technical expertise in different areas to advise on the policies that were being drafted in those areas, in addition to being the sort of network out to the community in those areas. So having the report cover that process, how it went. But I think it's also important, and I did hear it in the comments, that, you know, if there are concerns with what's in the OCP, that should be highlighted. I think you do want to wait for the more broad public input to come in, as was mentioned, in case there's changes, but also leave that document open so that if following that public consultation and your feedback before the report goes to council, maybe there are still items we want to change in the document to clarify that. And, you know, to Nancy's point, we had we've had a bit of change in staffing, but our city clerk who looks after council processes and that sort of thing, I just recommend that as a body of council, it is public information. So as much as possible going forward, keeping that in mind in your communications. I mean, everybody here is professional, but that those items should be kept and filed for the very unlikely event that somebody ever asked to see, which is the reason why we're recording these and broadcasting them. But if there is any need for FOI request to release information and that sort of thing.
Thank you. And Ian, we should acknowledge each time the tremendous work that you and all of your staff, Nancy and Tats, are the point person on this, but there's a huge amount of effort that city staff are putting into this and doing it really well. So thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate that. We do, I mean, across the board at the city, all departments are stretched to the maximum with our resources. So you know, Tats and Nancy, of course, are doing the massive heavy lifting. I get the regular check-ins weekly with them and provide direction where I can. But there is also the documents referred out to the entire senior leadership team, as well as others in the city that are providing input, and highly valuable. So appreciate that comment.
Yeah, thank you. Now, Sheena, I hadn't answered one of your questions, and I see you've got your hand up again.
Yeah. It's just a quick comment, Norm. I just wanted to reframe daunting. I don't find this daunting. I find this clarity. This is a path forward. It actually takes down my anxiety when I see a document that's going to lead me through. So it isn't daunting. This is awesome. This is great. This is what this gives me great clarity in how we will move forward.
Okay, thank you. When Betty and I, just jumping back, when Betty and I talked about how we might gather the information, when we've got 13 different people coming from 13 different perspectives on a document that's going to be several hundred pages long, I think daunting is a word that I can use there fairly. And so we tried to look at just what might be, looking at the table of contents, what might be some reasonable clusters of things that fit together. A number of issues under environment naturally fit together, like nature, land use, growth management. You know, there's a number of parks and recreation, but land use affects several things. And even when we went through the table of content, there was a couple of areas that didn't show up. Schools and education, seniors. So we said, let's just use 4 words to try and, if there was some natural clustering that happened in the meetings that allowed us to focus on issues, if there was contentious issues around it, that would get us started. We've only had a few people giving us feedback, and I'm thinking from the sense of this meeting that we'll probably go in there and say, what do you want to see in the report, without worrying about whether it's environmental, social, or whatnot for that day. We'll just get your feedback and work with it. So I wouldn't worry about the 4 word labels. Just what do you want to see in our report, and what meeting days work best for you, and whether we should do it Zoom or in person. And when we get that feedback from people, we'll quickly structure something, run it by you, and work to get your inputs fairly and effectively. Yeah, clear as mud, I know. So we'll send out another email to people, just reminding, because several people haven't responded yet, and maybe clarifying, what we've learned and how it's changed today, and a little more clarity on what Nancy intimated. We are a council committee, therefore we have to be careful of operating in these little meetings below quorum, or otherwise they have to be publicly available. But also we need to keep and file our email chains and whatnot for freedom of information requests. So we'll need to do that as a collection process as we go. But that's just part of the requirements of being a formal committee. Okay, is there anyone who would like to make any closing comments? We've just been given a huge amount of very rich and comforting information, but a lot. And so it's going to take some time for us to go through it, to look at how we carry the story out to our respective audiences and how we can help in that process. And if you could get back to Betty and I your preferred times to meet, we can get out to you with some more firm plans in the very near future. Is that a comment, Erin, or a goodbye?
Oh, no, just a really quick comment, just on the end of Nancy. So if we do, I know you mentioned your original email, if we do have feedback between now that we have the link, and the 60-day period, should we be sitting on our comments and submitting them to our feedback as part of that 60-day period, or can we start directing those to you and staff?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's this little kind of preview time before it goes public. It is intended if there's anything, accidental written in there that we did not intend, or something, erroneous, by all means, send it our way. If it is more, in the general nature of the kind of heft of comments we're expecting during the consultation period, I think it's fair to send them during that time, because we are expecting everybody to be turning their minds at that time. We want to give everybody that thoroughness and that time to do it. So we really don't want the advisory committee to feel rushed in any way, that you have to race to get some comments in. If you're finding you did it already and you want to send it our way, feel free. And certainly if we have the time to catch anything beyond anything erroneous, we'll incorporate it in, but there's no pressure on your end.
Okay, folks, a really useful check-in. Compliments to the staff for meeting the next hurdle of having public information closer to being ready. And we look forward to seeing more of the document as it comes out. We very much appreciate getting an early look at this. And thank you everyone for taking the time, as much as you squeezed in, to read the document as carefully as you could and give such perceptive and thoughtful comments. Well done. So we'll be in touch with more meetings coming, and I'm presuming that someone's making a motion that the next meeting will be at the call of the chair. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Sheila. Carried. Meeting adjourned.